Got a big exam coming up on medieval Europe? Well, don't sweat it. We're about to run through everything you need to know, hitting every single key topic from your study guide so you're totally prepped and ready to go. Let's just dive right in. So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the most powerful institution of the era, the church. Then we'll look at how that power influenced art and helped create new kingdoms. After that, it's all about the Crusades, the holy wars that defined an age, and the huge events that brought the whole system to an end. And we'll finish up with a final lightning review. All right, first up, the Roman Catholic Church. And look, it is absolutely impossible to overstate how influential it was. The church was the center of everything in medieval life, shaping politics, power, and how people understood their place in the universe. So, the church's power was organized in this really strict pyramid. Right at the very top, you had the Pope, the undisputed leader. Just below him were the cardinals, who were the powerful guys who actually elected the next pope, and the bishops, who were kind of like regional managers for the church. And then, down at the bottom, you had the local clergy, the priests, monks, and nuns that everybody saw in their daily lives. Okay, let's knock out some key vocab from your study guide. First, the Great Schism of 1054. Think of it as the big official divorce between the two main branches of Christianity. Next, heresy. This is any belief the church said was wrong, and trust me, it was a very serious accusation. And to handle it, the church created the Inquisition, which was basically a powerful court set up to investigate and punish heretics. So, who really had more power, popes or kings? Well, the investiture controversy settles that question. It was this huge showdown over who got to appoint bishops, which was a super powerful job. When the Holy Roman Emperor tried to challenge the Pope just excommunicated him, kicked him right out of the church. The emperor literally had to beg for forgiveness, which sent a crystal clear message all across Europe. The Pope was more powerful than even the mightiest king. Scholasticism might sound like a big, complicated word, but the idea is actually pretty straightforward. It was a new way of thinking that tried to combine two different worlds, the logic and reason of ancient Greek philosophers like Aristotle, with the faith and teachings of Christianity. The whole point was to use logic to explore questions about religion. In fact, the most famous scholastic, a guy named St. Thomas Aquinas, even used this method to try and write logical proofs that God exists. Okay, let's switch gears a bit and see how this worldview was expressed in a more visual way. The art and architecture of the Middle Ages are really like a window into the soul of the era, reflecting all its values in stone, glass, and paint. So your study guide wants you to know the difference between the two big architectural styles. On the left, you have Romanesque. It's older, with these thick, heavy walls, curved arches, and small windows. It has a real fortress-like vibe. But then came Gothic, on the right, and it is all about height and light. It used pointed arches and these supports called flying buttresses, which let them build thinner walls and putting massive, beautiful stained glass windows. Medieval art wasn't really trying to be realistic like a photograph. Its main goal was to tell a story and send a spiritual message. That's why people often look kind of flat and expressionless, and why you see so much bright color and gold leaf. It was all meant to symbolize the glory of heaven. And the main themes? You're going to see a ton of Christianity, scenes of knights and war, and this constant grim reminder of death, known as memento mori, which means remember, you must die. All right, now we're shifting from culture to politics. During this time, you start to see these scattered, decentralized feudal lands begin to pull together into powerful, unified kingdoms. We're going to focus on two huge examples here, England and Spain. 1066, if you remember one date from this whole period, make it 1066. It's one of the most important dates in English history. The king died without an heir, which kicked off this massive three-way fight for the throne. The guy who came out on top was William, the Duke of Normandy, and his victory at the Battle of Hastings didn't just make him king, it totally reshaped England forever. Now, the Magna Carta is a total game changer. Signed back in 1215, it was the first time anyone had ever successfully put a legal limit on the power of an English king. His own nobles got fed up and forced King John to agree that even the king was not above the law. This document introduced some revolutionary ideas for the time, like habeas corpus, the right to a trial, which meant you couldn't just be thrown in jail forever without a reason. Meanwhile, down on the Iberian Peninsula, this centuries-long conflict called the Reconquista was going on. This was basically a long campaign by Christian kingdoms to reconquer the land from Muslim rulers. The whole thing finally came to a head with the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella. Their marriage united their lands, created a single, powerful Kingdom of Spain, and officially ended the Reconquista in 1492. Next up, one of the biggest topics of the era, the Crusades. This was a whole series of holy wars that pitted European Christians against Muslims for control of the Holy Land. And believe me, these conflicts would have deep, lasting consequences for centuries to come. So let's break this down real simple. What caused the Crusades? Well, the main trigger was reports that Christian pilgrims weren't safe in Jerusalem, which led the Byzantine emperor to ask the Pope for military help. The most famous one, the Third Crusade, saw two legendary leaders go head-to-head. King Richard the Lionhearted of England and the brilliant Muslim general Saladin. And the long-term results? The Holy Land stayed under Muslim control, trade between Europe and the Middle East absolutely exploded, and the Byzantine Empire was left seriously weakened. And now we get to the end of an era. The feudal system, with all its knights and castles and serfs, it seemed like this permanent, unchangeable way of life. But in the 14th century, two massive disasters hit Europe, and the whole thing came crashing down. So, the big question is, how did this happen? What could possibly be powerful enough to end a system that had dominated Europe for hundreds of years? Well, the answer is a devastating one-two punch, a deadly plague, and a totally new kind of warfare. The end of feudalism really came down to two major disasters. First, you have the Black Death. This plague killed so many people that it created a huge labor shortage. All of a sudden, the peasants who survived could demand actual wages for their work, and that just completely shattered the old lord and serf system. At the same time, you had the Hundred Years' War, which introduced crazy new weapons like the longbow and gunpowder cannons, making armored knights and stone castles pretty much obsolete. I want you to just let that number sink in for a second. Somewhere between a quarter and a half of the entire population of Europe died. It's almost impossible to imagine that level of devastation. This was the event that completely rewired European society and its economy, paving the way for the end of the Middle Ages. Okay, we've hit all the big sections. For our final review, we're going to do a super quick lightning round to make sure you've got the key people and the most important dates locked in your brain. Ready? Let's run through them fast. St. Thomas Aquinas, think scholasticism, Saladin, the brilliant Muslim general in the Third Crusade, his main rival, Richard the Lionhearted, King of England, St. Joan of Arc, the young woman who saved France during the Hundred Years' War, and Ferdinand and Isabella, the king and queen who united Spain and paid for Columbus's voyage. And finally, your key dates. 1066 marks the end of the early Middle Ages with the Normans conquering England. 1453 is a huge turning point. The Hundred Years' War ends and the Byzantine Empire falls. And 1492 is the year that's traditionally seen as the end of the entire medieval period, with the Reconquista finishing and, of course, the discovery of the Americas. And that is a wrap. We have walked through every single major topic on your study guide, from the power of the church all the way to the fall of feudalism. You've seen the concepts, you've seen the people, you've seen the dates. You are totally ready for this exam. You've got this. But before you go, here's one last thing to chew on. The medieval period is obviously over, but its legacy is everywhere. Think about it. How do the ideas that started back then, ideas about individual rights from the Magna Carta, the tension between church and state, and even the history of the Crusades, how do all those things still shape our world right now? Something to think about? Good luck on your test.